Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make old school trance, sort of more like the Push, like early Tiesto records, Bonzai, Cosmic Gate, that whole style of stuff. I think the interesting thing is that this style of trance is influencing current music a lot, especially dance music, especially techno, of course. I mean, hard techno right now is like almost kind of close to this, really. And so I thought it would be interesting to really break down a lot of what was going on in the tracks back in the day so we can understand how to do it now rather than just having an understanding of it based on stuff that you've heard in current records. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available at the top of the description on my Bandcamp and on my website as well for just $5. It really helps support me if you guys enjoyed these videos, so definitely consider going to pick that up, and let's dive in. Alright, so first thing up here is the kick. So as you can hear, it's a pretty punchy, hard-hitting kick, and it's made with two layers. So I have this one for the low end, and then this one for the high end. And the reason why I'm doing this is because a lot of times, you know, the kick that's good for the low end isn't always going to have the best high end and mid-range. And a lot of times, almost every time, the kick that has the best high end and mid-range just isn't going to have the right level of low end. So a lot of times what you have to do is find one that's really good in one range, one that's really good in another range, and then you put them together and you make the best kick. So that's what we've done here, and I'll play you the original kicks. See, like this low kick is really solid in the low end, and then the high end just sounds like too much like a dubstep kick or something like that, right? And it's just not really that punchy. But then this one, if I take out, see, this one has good high end and mid range, but the low end's kind of muddy. Like it didn't really have a good low end to it. So it's just a very simple method of layering. And then all you gotta make sure that you do is just that you zoom in and do like this. I'm gonna show you that. And then same thing on this one. So they'll both punch at exactly the same time like that. You can hear that sounds a lot cleaner. And then on the group there, I just have a little bit of this drum bass. You can see I'm blending it with the dry signal. So here's without this. And with it, you can hear it's just a little boost, but it makes things a little bit stronger and kind of glues the kick together as well. And then what's happening in the intro here, it's really simple. But basically all this is we have these elements playing, and those are all side chained to the kick. And we want to keep that side chain going, so you kind of get that like kind of trancey like pulsing effect. So all I did is I just took the kick and put it there, and then I just automated it so that you're not hearing it. But now all those elements still have the side chain, versus if I turn this off, see, it's a little bit more messy, and it doesn't have that same groove to it. Alright, and then we have the main bass, which sounds like this. Now, the idea here is that we're going to have this bass that's just steadily just a straight rolling 16th notes. But that on its own is a bit boring, especially when you have these just like parts where it's just going to be the root note. So to add groove to the bass line, what we do is we actually have this layer. And that's just kind of playing some extra 16th notes in there. But that's what adds a lot of movement to the bass. And I think when you hear these bass lines, it can be a bit daunting, right? Because like if you're hearing this and you don't realize that it's two different synths, yeah, you can get pretty lost pretty quick trying to do that. I know because I've done it before. So what you have to do is, again, you start with your steady and this doesn't even have to be that pattern. Like, you know, you could just do, yeah, it could be whatever you want it to be, but essentially you're going to have your main steady one like this, and then that grooving one over top of it. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I think that's important to say, because again, yeah, like, if you've never really done this type of track before, it can be really confusing, I think. And a lot of times you can make a really good bass like this and still not have it quite there, and you think that it's in the one patch, but really it's just that you need to make the layer. Now for the actual MIDI on this one, it's playing like this pretty busy progression where we go, so essentially our root note is A, right? We're in the key of A minor, so we're using the 6th, the 4th, and then the root note there. And then here goes the 3rd, 4th, and then back down to root note. So it's always ending up on that root note, but just having these like different kind of like minor musical intervals. And that really just comes down to knowing like this minor scale pretty well. Like it's gonna be the same whichever key you're in, but just really getting to know the scale that like a lot of these kind of tracks are made in. I mean, this scale is used in techno, it's used in trance, it's used in classical music, it's used in like, you know, like cinematic stuff. I mean, there's so many genres that use this kind of feel that once you get pretty fluent with it, like you can write a lot of cool stuff in the style of scales. Now for the sound, it's made with 2 layers. So we have our main, which you can see it's just a saw wave, and then another one with a little bit of synth and pulse width. And then we have this going into a low pass filter with an envelope on it to give it that pluck. And the last secret here is the phase sync. So what this does is it resets these. So essentially the phase on an oscillator is just where on this waveform you're playing. So like sometimes the phase is here, sometimes the phase is here, sometimes it's over here. And the problem with that for these trancey basses is that you really need it to be like just a very steady sound, right? Like you need it to be the same pluck every single time. So if we turn this off, or like put it on like the classic mode, you can see it's like kind of changing a lot and it doesn't really sound that good. So this phase sync just sets those so they'll be the same every time. And you get that more kind of like machine-like, sort of like, almost as if it's audio, it's just the same thing every time. And the last thing to this is just a low-pass filter. Yeah, it's got that envelope, but you want to make sure the envelope's pretty short. Like, if you start to make this longer, it can really mess up the groove, so you just have to have that tight. Like that. And it helps to have the notes in beforehand. I don't really think you can make a bass like this and really get the right settings on the filter envelope unless you already are just listening to it alongside with a kick playing exactly the bass line that it's going to play. Then we have this layer on top of it, which is kind of a similar, you can see it's actually made using like almost the same stuff. This has a square wave with pulse width and synth though. And then we have a low pass filter here with the envelope on it. And this one has some unison on it. I've got it on the noise setting. So that's just kind of giving it, yeah, that more like chorusy kind of unison thing. I also have some chorus on this, and then a high pass filter. And the last thing here is a short reverb with like a sharp pre-delay. And it just kind of makes it bounce off really nicely. And then you put those together and you get a really full sounding bass. And then I just have a compressor side chaining it to the kick. The side chain is going to be pretty important. We also have this EQ here cutting out a little bit of room. Just some of those low frequencies that you're not really going to hear. That'll mess up your mix. And then finally, this high pass filter and low pass filter are just for the intro here, just to bring this in. Just kind of makes it fade in a little bit. And we still have the low end groove, but now once you let go of the high pass filter, once the drop comes, that makes that bass hit so much harder versus just having the full bass in that break. And then for the bass groove, this is just playing one note. It's just playing A. So while the rest, you know, it just kind of drums like that. But you can hear it's got a nice groove. It bounces up on that last note. So it's like, yeah, just adding a lot of groove to that main bass. And so for the sound on this one, this is also made with wavetable. This is also just a saw wave and a square wave here. You can see it's actually a pretty similar patch to that last one I showed you. I've got the sub oscillator on this as well. And then we just have a low pass filter, which has this envelope on it. And then a bunch of unison. And this almost to me feels like a melodic techno sound or like melodic house or something like that. But yeah, and that's just going through some chorus, a bit of dotted and eighth note echo. I have a high pass filter so it doesn't get in the way of the main bass. It's being sidechained to the kick as well. And then finally just this low pass filter for the intro. And you'll notice, I'll talk about this a little bit more with the lead. With the intro, when these filter up, so it's building, and then it goes down, and then it builds right back up really hard, and then it drops. Versus just having it like this, where it just like that's a little bit more boring than if you have it kind of build up, and then all of a sudden it all goes away. But then it comes back really hard, and then we drop. You know, it's just a little bit more kind of nuance there that can make it a lot more impactful. Then we have these building sounds, which is really just a snare and then this noise sweep. I think a lot of times people think that the building snares, And all these kind of effects need to be a lot more complicated than they are. But really, all you need is just a solid snare like this and a good sweep, and like just let those shine. You know, you don't need to throw like 5 risers on top of this and like, you know, a bunch of extra building stuff. Like if you just have this stuff, especially with these more like old school style tracks, you know, it's really impactful just to let these shine. So the snare is just doing 16th notes, except at the end it does that little and that's just going through 2 effects. So we have an auto pan here, so you can kind of bounce up like that, so it goes like that. And then we're also automating this utility to just make the volume build up. So it's those 2 volume movements. Plus, on top of that, what we're doing is you can see I'm automating the decay. So the snare kind of starts out as like it's very tight, but then by the end, it's very like, you get the full body of the snare. So just little things to make it a little bit more impactful are all going to add up along the way. And then for the noise sweep, so yeah, just some white noise inside of operator, bandpass filter being automated, and that's going through a bit of reverb. I have a high pass filter because if you don't do that, a lot of times with the lower, see, like when it's really low like that, you get that like that could kind of mess up your mix. So we just want to make sure we cut that out. And then I have that same auto pan to just make it kind of like, you want this stuff to have kind of like a pulse to it. I think that's a big part of the trance sound, is kind of like the liveliness and how everything really sounds like it's just constantly bouncing off the kick and stuff, even if the kick isn't playing. Then we have this counter melody. So yeah, that just kind of plays against the main lead. You can hear it actually works really well with the chord progression. But it also just provides a little bit of a counter, like I said, to that main lead, so it's not just these. But you can hear with that. It just adds a little bit more emotion to the overall track, and it's also a good element to have because, you know, maybe you have a part where like it's just this lead, and then you have a part where it's just this. And then the big part is when you have both of them together. So, for the actual notes on this, it's very simple. Now, in terms of the scale that we're in, it's kind of flipping it a little bit on its head, but it's actually a very simple melody. It's just kind of like very smart usage of notes within the scale, because obviously we're in the key of A minor, but if you notice, there's no A in here. So what we're doing is we're starting actually with the minor third. So you just kind of get a very like particular feel from that, right? Like it's very dreamy sounding versus going to like just the root note right there. And then down here what we get is the 5th and the 6th. But then it doesn't matter that we're not using the root note, because obviously like the key is very clear. So you can hear how this fits over that really well, and then you're able to kind of do a little bit more interesting stuff. So yeah, like when you're trying to write a melody like this, don't always just start with the root note, right? Like a lot of times, especially with these kind of tracks, you can write these cool, very simple, this is only 3 notes, but it's very catchy kind of melodies like this, just kind of like thinking a little bit differently, and again, not just like starting with the root note, because if we move that to the root note, it's not quite as impactful, right? It doesn't have that same like dreamy kind of feel. And then for the sound on this one, this is made with wavetables. So it's a square wave with the noise unison. You can see the envelope is set like that. And then we just have some echo, a bit of reverb, a bit of drum bus as well to make it fatter. And then a compressor side chaining into the kick. And then finally just a high pass filter, cutting out the low end and making sure that there's not going to be anything getting in the way of the bass. Then we have our main lead. As you can hear, this lead is just really like it's very much just kind of droning. You know, it's only a few notes here, right? Because it's kind of just going to sit over top of the bass line. But the notes that we do use are very impactful. So here we actually do use the root note. And then that same 6th and 5th, 4th, another root note. So it's just those notes, but It's just a wave that sits over top of the main bass. The way I wrote this is I tried to imagine like how it would fit with that main bass. Like, for example, you're actually getting a major chord right there, because if you look at the bass, it's playing F, and you look at the high note, it's playing A. Well, all that is, it's just F major right there. So like, just kind of like thinking about how this can play with the bass line to kind of create chords. And help tell the story rather than just having like a crazy like jumping around everywhere lead like you might think. And yeah, so this is just a saw wave, you know, pretty straightforward with the classic unison. Obviously this is the type of sound you just have to let that saw wave breathe and let it sound really good as is. You can't do too much to get in the way of it. It's going through a bit of echo, a bit of reverb, and some drum bus as well, which doesn't take away from it, but just makes it a lot fatter. It's being side-chained to the kick. I have this EQ here, which is filtering at the low end, and also just doing a little high-end boost, and then that low-pass automation in the break. Again, just having it like build all the way up, you can really hear it with these. Then it goes down, and then back up again. It's like, whoa! Right as it's dropping, you know? Woo! It's a simple trick, but it's really going to help, especially with these trancey style of tracks. It sounds good. And then we have our percussion, which as you can hear is actually pretty layered, but it's very like open, right? Like you need a lot of room in the track so that you can still fit like all these different grooves in there. So if you notice, the percussion is mostly like in the high end. So it starts with like our hi-hats. So we just have this open hi-hat with some reverb, bit of a high-end boost, and then also this 909 closed hi-hat, which adds a little bit more movement in there too, because it's doing that like. So those are layered together. And then we have this rolling percussion, which is just some different sounds I put together to kind of create this loop. That you can hear just grooves really nicely. Like keep in mind, all this groove that we're playing right now, this is constantly happening while you're hearing this whole big thing. Of course, you don't really think it because you're hearing so much stuff, but you're hearing this. Like that alone just has a lot of groove, you know? So you need to have stuff set up like that. That's creating a lot of groove, and then it's about how this is all adding together, essentially. So that's what that does. And then we have this rave loop. You're another one of those classic kind of 90s, 2000s style, like hi-hat loops, sampled. That's definitely one of those ones where like you kind of just have to use a loop, right? Because there's a lot of life there and movement that you really just don't get with program percussion. Then we have the clap, which is made of 2 layers. So you can hear, is this more like layered together, actually with a Lindrum clap with a bunch of reverb on it to make it a bit spacey. And you can hear those 2 sounds. It's just about picking sounds that are gonna like really slam through the mix like that. Like these 2 just hit really hard. So you don't need to do much other than just level them out properly. And then the track is gonna sound good. And the last thing down here is the crash. You know, very classic 90s trance style crash. It's just like, you know, that almost like housey, but a little bit more like polished. And yeah, so that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets. Everything that I've just used in this video is available right at the top of the description on my website and also on my Bandcamp. for just $5. This really helps support me. If you guys enjoyed these videos, definitely go pick that up because you get a great template, a bunch of great samples and MIDI and presets to use. But you also help support me. You know, it really helps keep me going so I can keep bringing you guys new videos every day. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video.